This is the unit circle. We are going to start by filling in our degrees around our circle. So let's start with the quarter turns because those are the easiest. So your positive x-axis, we're going to start at 0 on the positive x-axis. Please make sure you fill this into the correct blank that has the degree symbol next to it. The next blank after that is for radians, and we haven't learned that yet. So don't fill in that blank. We're going to leave those all blank around the circle until we learn about radians. So just degrees. A quarter turn around the circle brings us to how many degrees? 90. Another quarter turn brings us to 180. Another quarter turn is 270. And all the way around the circle is 360. All right. Now, each quadrant is split up to 3 more degree values. And you'll notice that this is to scale. So this unit circle is actually to scale. So if you see how far we're going to get to each point, whether it's halfway through that quadrant or a third of the way through that quadrant, this is actually drawn to scale. So you can determine that based off of how far you're going. Let's talk about halfway through. So this middle point here is halfway through our first quadrant. So what degree is halfway between 0 and 90? 45. Okay, so that's this point right here. This angle measurement to the second line would be 45. Second line in that quadrant. All right. So halfway is 45, and then we do that half twice. So 45 plus 45 is 90. And then halfway between 90 and 180, anybody know that? We're going to add 45 again, good, and get 135. All right. So every time we're going halfway through the quadrant, we're adding 45. So 45 plus 45 is 90, plus 45 is 135, plus 45 is 180. What is 180 plus 45?
225.
Good. 225 plus 45 is 270. What is 270 plus 45? 315. Good. So those are our 45 degree angles. Now, remember, in your 45, 45, 90 triangle, your base and your height, the two legs of your triangle, are exactly the same. So that means the x and the y value of each of these coordinates is going to be the same. We are going to look at a 45, 45, 90 triangle in order to determine this. The reference triangle for a 45, 45, 90 has legs 1, 1, and 2. Square root 2, sorry. 1, 1, square root 2. But this is the unit circle, so this hypotenuse, if we draw in a triangle here, straight down, if I make a right triangle, what is the hypotenuse equal to in the unit circle? What is the length of this hypotenuse? 1, because the radius of the circle is 1, and we're going from the center to the point on the circle. So that's not the triangle we've been using. We've been using a 45, 45, 90 triangle with a radius of 1, which means the two side lengths are what? What do you do to root 2 to get 1? You divide by root 2, divide by root 2, divide by root 2. This is what we just did on the whiteboards. So 1 over root 2 is the same as?
Well, over 2.
root 2 over 2. As we rationalize it, multiply the numerator and denominator by the square root of 2. Those two side lengths are the same, which means on this triangle we're going to the right, root 2 over 2, up root 2 over 2. So that is the x and the y value of the coordinate. Okay, questions on that first coordinate? All right. That is going to be our reference triangle. Every other triangle that has a reference angle of 45 degrees will have very similar coordinates. We just change whether the x and y are positive or negative depending on what quadrant we're in. So, in quadrant 2, this triangle right here has a reference angle of 45 degrees. So it takes 45 degrees to get to the x-axis. All right, which means my x and my y are the same except for one of them is negative. Which value is negative, the x value or the y value? The x. We're going left x, up y, and we know the left side of the x-axis is negative. So that's negative root 2 over 2, comma, positive root 2 over 2. All right, going down to this next triangle, I could reflect this triangle downward to the next point, which has the next 45 degree reference angle. Is my x value positive or negative in quadrant 3?
Negative.
Is my y value positive or negative in quadrant 3? Negative. So this is negative root 2 over 2, negative root 2 over 2. Okay, and then in quadrant 4, I could reflect this triangle down and literally reflect this point over to be right here at 315. Which value is negative in quadrant 4?
The y.
The y value is negative, so that means the x value is positive. Okay, so those are all the 45 degree triangles in the unit circle. Okay, we're going to go back a second because we forgot to fill in our coordinates for our 90 degree angles around the circle. So if I'm going from the origin to the right by whatever the radius is to get to the outside of the circle, what is the length of the radius? 1. So if I'm going to the right 1 up 0, what is this point?
1, 0.
Good. If I'm not going left or right, I'm only going up 1. What is this point?
0, 1.
0, 1. At 180 degrees, what is that point? Negative 1, 0. Good. So left 1 up 0. And at 270? Over 0, down 1. So 0, negative 1. Very good. All right. How many coordinates do we have left to fill in?
3, 2,
2, 4, 6,
we'll do the same.
8, right? They are going to be similar. So there's 2 more in quadrant 1. Yeah. Let's talk about this one. Okay, so there's another right triangle. Don't worry about that. What is the other special right triangle that we talked about besides a 45, 45, 90 triangle? 30, 60, 90. All right, so that should be a right angle. in a 30, 60, 90 triangle, we're going to fill in our different side lengths. What is the hypotenuse? 1. We did 2 triangles, right? We got one where the hypotenuse was 1, but our original reference triangle was a 2, right? It was 1, square root 3, 2. But in a previous lesson, we found a similar triangle where the hypotenuse is 1. What is, bless you, what is our shorter, length of our shorter side if the hypotenuse is 1? Length 1/2. And what is the longer side if our hypotenuse is 1? Root 3 over 2. And how did we get that from this triangle? Good. Dividing everything by 2, because 2 divided by 2 is 1. Divide everything by 2. All right, this is the triangle we're going to use because my hypotenuse is equal to 1 in the unit circle. So, what degree is this right here? 30, because it's a third of the way through the first quadrant. So 30, and then if I add 30 again, I get 2/3 of the way through, which would be 60. So 30 plus 30 is 60, plus 30 is 90. So then we would be all the way through. This is 3/3 of the triangle. Or I'm sorry, of the first quadrant. All right, so if this angle is 60 and the opposite side is 1/2, is that up and down an x or a y value?
Y.
That's a y value, so y is 1/2. How far are we going over to go up 1/2? Over root 3 over 2, up 1/2. Okay, we're going to do the 60-degree angle at the same time. I should have wrote that in a different color. Okay, so here's our 60-degree triangle. All right. So now my side lengths of my 30, 60, 90 triangle have swapped. And you can tell because my x is now shorter than my y, where before my x was longer than my y. So the longer side of a 30, 60, 90 triangle is root 3 over 2. The shorter side is 1/2. So how far am I going to the right? 1/2. So that is the x value. How far am I going up? Root 3 over 2. Now remember, if you draw in these triangles, you can see clearly that the x value is shorter than the y value here. You're only going over a little bit and then up more. In the 30-degree triangle, you're going over a lot and up a little. And if you know which number is bigger, you can help write those in. All right, so we finished quadrant 1. That's all of quadrant 1. Everything else can be reflected to other quadrants, but you just have to reflect correctly. So we are going to go in and fill in all of the degrees first, and then we'll fill in what the coordinates are. So 30 is 30 away from 0. And then we add another 30 to get to 60. We add another 30 to get to 90. And all of these next points are going to be 1/3 of the way through each quadrant. So what is 90 plus 30?
120.
Good. What is 120 plus 30?
150.
150 plus 30 is 180. What is 180 plus 30?
210.
Good. What is 210 plus 30?
240.
240 plus 30 is 270. What is 270 plus 30?
300.
And 300 plus 30 is 330. Oh, and 330 plus 30 would be 360, which would get us all the way around. Okay, be very careful. You want to reflect the correct triangle that matches with the same reference angle. So, 150, how far, what's the reference angle of 150?
30.
30, because it's 30 degrees away from what number? 180. So this would be a 30-degree reference triangle, which would match our 30-degree reference triangle on the right. See how this triangle has been reflected to the other side? Those coordinates are both closest to the x-axis out of all of the coordinates in their quadrant. See how they're both closest? We are going to reflect to the other side. Which value does that change? X or Y? One of them is going to be negative. Which value is going to be negative?
X.
Yeah, because we go left X, up Y. How far are we going to the left?
Negative square root of 3 over 2.
Good. Left root 3 over 2, so negative root 3 over 2. Up 1/2. We can do the same with 60. We're going to reflect that triangle to the left. So my x value is still negative. My y value is positive. So that means the negative 1/2. 1/2 is the one that's negative. And root 3 over 2 stays positive because my y value were still above the x-axis. Now, I'm not going to reflect the triangles every single time because we're going to start to see some of the patterns. But you do need to be careful about where you're reflecting. If your reference angle is 30 degrees, then your coordinate should be root 3 over 2, comma 1/2, and the only thing that's going to change is the positive and negatives of that value. So, which of these three which of these 3 degrees have a reference angle of 30 in quadrant 3? 210 has a reference angle of 30 because it is 30 away from 180. Only 210 has a reference angle of 30. Which means I'm going to use root 3 over 2, comma 1/2. How many values are negative in quadrant 3?
2.
2. So they're both negative. Which means 240 is a 60-degree reference angle. That's a lot bigger. It's 60 degrees. So it matches our 60-degree reference angle of 1/2 root 3 over 2. Which one's negative?
Both.
Both. Very good. We're in quadrant 3, so both values are negative. All right. Quadrant 4. Which degree is a 30-degree reference angle or has a 30-degree reference angle?
330.
330 because it's 30 away from 360. So we look at the 30 degree, which is root 3 over 2, 1/2. Which one's negative? 1/2. Over root 3 over 2, down 1/2 means negative. If you want to draw on the triangle every single time, you're more than welcome to, because then you can see that you're going over 1/2, down square root of 3 over 2 for the last one. All right. Let's let's talk about which values are positive in quadrant 1. Is sine positive? Is cosine positive? Is tangent positive? Okay, how do we know sine is positive? Sine is the y value, cosine is the x value. What is tangent? Y over x. Good. Which value is positive in quadrant 2? The sine value. Very good. And cosine is not, therefore a positive divided by a negative is not going to be positive. Which value is positive in quadrant 3? Well, a negative divided by a negative is positive, so only tangent is positive in quadrant 3. Which value is positive in quadrant 4? Cosine. Cosine is positive in quadrant 4.